During the third day of hearing at the International Court of Justice, the Cuban delegation accused the Israeli occupation of committing massacres against the Palestinian people and denounced the United States of complicity in the massacres committed in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, in Palestine, an Israeli airstrike on a residential building in Deir al-Balah killed at least 25 people in the central Gaza Strip. And on this second day of hearing on Julian Assange's extradition, Stella Assange claimed attempts against her husband are a criminalization of journalism and truth. Hello and welcome to From the South. My name is Belén de los Santos and from the TeleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba, we begin with the news. During the third day of hearing at the International Court of Justice, the Cuban delegation accused the Israeli occupation of committing massacres against the Palestinian people and denounced the United States of complicity in the massacres committed in the Gaza Strip. The jury of the International Justice Organism continues to hear the arguments of the different countries condemning the actions of Israel for its illegal actions of forcibly occupying the Palestinian territories. Several representatives of the Caribbean countries gave their position on the silence of the international community and the complicity of the United States in sponsoring the siege that Israel maintains in Palestine. The representative of the Cuban delegation, Ana Yassi Rodriguez, denounced the Tel Aviv regime of committing apartheid in the occupied Palestinian territories.
The Palestinian people, its girls, boys, women, and civilian population as a whole continue to be massacred due to the illegal use of force by Israel, the occupying power. All this takes place with the complicity of countries such as the United States of America, responsible under international law for genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the apartheid regime that determines where people can live, work, and move around depending on their ethnic and religious backgrounds.
The representative of the Cuban delegation stressed that Israel must assume legal responsibility and involvement for its actions in the Palestinian territory.
The presentation of the Cuban delegation has been structured as follows. In the first part, we will discuss the essential legal elements that should serve as the basis for establishing the international responsibility of the occupying power and all other international actors involved. In the second part, we will focus on the legal implications and consequences that should be demanded for such internationally wrongful acts or omissions.
In Palestine on Wednesday, an Israeli airstrike on a residential building in Deir al-Balah killed at least 25 people in the central Gaza Strip. According to local media, among the victims of the bombings were 4 women and 4 children, and so far the number of wounded is unknown. It should be noted that also on Tuesday, 6 people were killed after an attack on a vehicle in the same locality. On the other hand, the health authorities denounced that in the last 24 hours, Israel has committed 11 massacres, killing 118 civilians and wounding more than 163 locals. In this regard, Gazans warned that meanwhile, hundreds of corpses remain in the streets and under the rubble. The Israeli army prevents rescue teams and residents from reaching them, while the latest overall death toll stands at 29,708 since October 7th. Israeli troops killed 3 Palestinian militants during an overnight raid in the northern West Bank city of Jenin. The Palestinian Health Ministry confirmed at least 1 death in the Israeli operation, the latest in a month-long military offensive across the occupied West Bank. An army release said that the IDF soldiers detained 14 people, killed 3 and shot down others. Meanwhile, the official Palestinian news agency Wafa said that Israeli troops stormed the town of Jenin overnight, besieged 2 houses and provoked violent clashes, during which 3 Palestinians were injured. Wafa added that the army hit a house with a missile in the adjacent refugee camps.
There is a need now to escalate every struggle and solidarity effort everywhere, not only in Palestine but throughout the world, in order to thwart the conspiracy of ethnic cleansing and break the conspiracy of the starvation. The Israeli occupation is committing a major crime, eliminating Palestinians through murder, destruction, bombing, starvation, and diseases.
The United States on Tuesday vetoed an Arab-backed UN resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in the conflict between Israel and Hamas in the besieged Gaza Strip. The proposal, which received 13 votes in favor, with the United Kingdom abstaining, also rejected the forcibly displacement of the Palestinian civilian population in violation of international law and demanded the immediate cessation of such violations and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. It also called for unrestricted humanitarian access to and throughout the Gaza Strip. U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield insisted that approval of the Algerian proposal could jeopardize ongoing negotiations. This is the 3rd time that the Security Council, whose resolutions are binding, has failed to reach a joint statement calling for a ceasefire in Gaza because of a U.S. veto. Russia accused the United States before the International Court of Justice of maintaining an irresponsible approach that has weakened the political processes to resolve the Israeli occupation in Palestine. During his speech, the Russian ambassador to the Netherlands, Vladimir Eugenievich-Starivrin, assured that the current wave in the Middle East is the result of ignoring the UN Security Council's resolutions. The diplomat accused Washington of sending military supplies to Tel Aviv, causing a greater tension before the international community for the resolution of the conflict between the Israeli regime and Hamas. In this context, the high diplomat pointed out that the Tel Aviv regime continues to carry out illegal aggressions against the civilian population in the Gaza Strip. For his part, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stated that an immediate full ceasefire between Israel and Hamas would not be in anyone's interest ahead of a parliamentary debate on this issue.
Mr. Speaker, this afternoon the House will have an opportunity to consider its approach to the situation in Israel and Gaza. Our position is crystal clear. We have called and will always call for an immediate humanitarian pause, which would allow the safe release of hostages and more aid going into Gaza to create the conditions for a genuinely sustainable ceasefire. But just calling for an immediate full ceasefire now, which collapses it back into fighting in days or weeks, would not be in anyone's interest, Mr. Speaker. We are committed not just to immediate humanitarian pause, but also to finding a lasting resolution to this conflict, which delivers on the promise of a two-state solution and ensures that Israelis and Palestinians can live in the future with dignity and security.
On Wednesday in Syria, at least 2 civilians were killed after a new attack by Israeli forces in a residential area of Damascus. In this regard, Syrian authorities reported that approximately 9:40 a.m. local time, Israel launched an airstrike with several missiles from the direction of the occupied Syrian Golan and targeted a residential building in the Kafr Sousa neighborhood in Damascus. In this sense, the bombing caused the killing of 2 civilians in addition to material damage to the targeted building and some nearby buildings. On the other hand, Syrian authorities condemned that Israel systematically attacks the Syrian territory in spite of numerous denunciations by Damascus before the UN Security Council, in which it points out that these actions infringe its sovereignty and threaten regional stability. Now let's take a short break. But remember, you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back from the South. In a solidarity act of accompaniment, Stella Assange claimed that attempts to extradite her husband, jailed WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, to the United States to face espionage charges for publishing secret material and diplomatic files are a criminalization of journalism and truth. Let's listen.
Argue is that state secrets trump revealing state crimes. This is the balance they're trying to shift. They want impunity, they don't want to be scrutinized, and journalism stands in the way. And in that courtroom, they are having to make their position increasingly clear. They have to admit that what they're doing is criminalizing journalism, is criminalizing the truth. They are liars. They are criminals, and they are persecuting the journalist who exposed them. Julian is a truth teller. He is a political prisoner. And the world is watching these courts and how they deal with this case.
On this second day of hearing, the Assistant General Secretary of the International Federation of Journalists, Tim Dawson, also addressed Julian Assange supporters outside the courthouse to demand freedom of the press.
We ask ourselves, why are we here in the rain? Why are we here in the cold? I say to you, it's because we want to defend those civil liberties. We want to defend press freedom, and we want to see the freedom of Julian Assange. Join me. Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Julian Assange's legal team made a strong case yesterday that if we allow this to happen, it will extinguish a liberty that we have enjoyed for centuries. That protection that people have from extradition for political reasons, no parliamentary debate, no parliamentary decision has been taken to extinguish that liberty. We will be doing so, we will all be losing that liberty simply for the convenience of the American.
And in Argentina, several press unions and other popular organizations also held a rally in the Plaza de Mayo in support of Australian journalist Julian Assange.
There is no doubt of what Assange has done, and therefore what is at stake with the imprisonment and, according to various UN agencies, the torture of Assange and his arbitrary imprisonment. What is at stake in precisely access to information.
In this context, a representative of the Committee for Julian Assange in Argentina assured that the United States wants to take revenge on Assange for showing the side of the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan that the world did not know about.
The United States Armed Forces want revenge for having leaked information that was sensitive for them, but that allowed millions in the world to understand the war crimes that were being committed at that time by the Bush administration. Tony Blair, who was the President of England, the Great Britain, and the entire coalition that accompanied the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan.
Meanwhile, in Brazil, representatives of several popular movements protested, demanding freedom for journalist Julian Assange as well. Activists and organizations in Rio de Janeiro rallied in front of the United Kingdom Embassy, demanding the release of the WikiLeaks founder, detained since 2019 for revealing U.S. war crimes. The mobilization is part of a global action that seeks to prevent his extradition to U.S. territory. If Assange's appeal fails in the British courts, he will have exhausted all avenues of appeal in the United Kingdom. However, his defense highlighted that a final appeal to the European Court of Human Rights is still possible.
Estamos unidos y en comunión con todo el mundo que no
We are
puede
united and in communion with the whole world that cannot continue to bear the crimes committed by the United States. crimes that were disclosed to the whole world through a courageous journalist who swore to tell the truth and told the truth, and because of that, he is being brutalized.
La persecución internacional
The
contra
international persecution against Assange is a consequence of the revelations he made about the wars, denouncing war crimes.
In other news, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in the country's capital amid a diplomatic crisis between Brazil and Israel over the war in Gaza. U.S. Secretary of State landed in Brazil on Tuesday for his first trip to the South American nation, arriving in the middle of a diplomatic friction after President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva enraged Washington ally Israel by comparing its Gaza campaign with the Holocaust. The comparison outraged Israel, which declared Lula persona non grata. President Joe Biden has been Israel's key backer, with the United States on Tuesday vetoing again a ceasefire call at the Security Council. For the top U.S. diplomat, the belated first trip to Latin America power had been seen as an opportunity to build ties. Also, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov arrived at the Foreign Ministry G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, scheduled to begin on February 21st. The conflict in Ukraine and the ongoing genocide from Israel to Hamas in Gaza are expected to be chief on the agenda at the upcoming summit. There will also be a space for bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the gathering, though a Blinken-Lavrov encounter looks unlikely given soaring tensions. The pair last met in person at the G20 gathering in India in March of the year 2023. In Brazil, the governor of Rio de Janeiro, Claudio Castro, declared a dengue epidemic in the state after 49,450 cases and 4 deaths were recorded since the beginning of this year. At a press conference, Governor Carioca emphasized the importance of working calmly, but emphasized that declaring the state of emergency would provide faster service. He also warned about the approaching difficult days and months. It is estimated that some 150,000 cases could be confirmed up to May. On Wednesday, Argentine railroad workers announced they will remain on strike after failing to reach an agreement with the government of Javier Milei for wage increases. In this sense, representatives of the drivers' union pointed out that they did not reach an agreement with the national government since it did not dictate the adjustment of the purchasing power as a measure to face inflation. In this sense, the railroad sector indicated that they will continue with the measure of strike, and there will be no trains at any point of the country until Thursday's midnight. In this sense, unions representatives assured that the strike has been almost completely complied due to consider the government proposal to demand of the train drivers insufficient. We have now a final short break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience. You can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and also share the link to reach more people. Constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the rest of the world. Stay connected and informed with TeleSUR. Final short break, don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. On Wednesday in India, police officers repressed with tear gas farmers marching to demand legal guarantees for their production. The farmers resumed the march after failing to achieve results they considered acceptable in the negotiations with the government. The sector is demanding an agreement that establishes favorable crop prices for products such as legumes, corn, and cotton for the next 5 years. Farmers trying to make their way to the Indian capital from the neighboring states of Punjab and Haryana have been pressing on the outskirts of the Indian capital for a week. However, police forces have fired tear gas shells at the protesters as they try to approach New Delhi. On Wednesday in Pakistan, the Pakistan Muslim League and the Pakistan People's Party confirmed the agreement to form a new coalition government in the country. The agreement marks the end of the political deadlock in Pakistan, where the authorities will have until February 19th to convene the first parliamentary session to decide on the new government. It should be noted that no political party obtained a simple majority in elections, which forced the parties to unite in order to come to power, but the lack of consensus had given rise to an uncertain scenario. Precisely, local media highlighted that the latest elections in Pakistan are facing allegations of electoral fraud, as a senior official resigned from his post on Saturday after taking responsibility for the manipulation of election results in at least 5 districts in the Punjab province. Thousands of Greek farmers protested in Athens on Tuesday to demand financial aid, escalating a 4-week showdown with a government that says there has no more funds to help. According to local police, some 8,000 farmers took part in the protest, honking horns and waving Greek flags on dozens of tractors driven to the capital from across the country. The farmers began protesting last month, joining a wider movement that has seen roads blocked in France, Germany, Italy, Poland, and Spain, among other countries. Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, on the other hand, said the demonstration would be useful to persuade the European Union to change its agricultural policies. Greek discontent is partially fueled by anger at a slow pace of reconstruction after devastating floods in September in Thessaly, the center of Greek agricultural production. Farmers want import controls, lower fuel taxes, better prices for products, and an easing of European Union environmental regulations. In Spain, the 31st Criminal Court of Madrid decreed the acquittal of José Manzaneda, coordinator of digital media Cuba Información and of Euskavi Cuba. The sentence comes 4 days after a public hearing in Madrid in which Manzaneda and Euskavi Cuba were accused by the president of the association Prisoners Defenders, Javier Larrondo, considered a detractor of the Cuban government. The court in Madrid also ordered the head of the Prisoner Defenders to pay part of the costs for his recklessness and bad faith, maintaining that the accusation lacked grounds. In a statement, the defense attorney recalled that the private prosecution was asking for 6 years in prison and a fine of 8,400 euros for the journalist. The criticism of the so-called anti-Castro focused on the medical collaboration that the Cuban government carries out in several countries of the world. In Albania, opposition demonstrators protested violently outside the government building to demand the resignation of Prime Minister Edi Rama. Several protesters were arrested after some threw incendiary devices at the police cordon. The protest in Tirana was organized by the Democratic Party of former Prime Minister Sali Berisha, who is currently serving a sentence for house arrest for corruption offenses. The protest was called on the anniversary of the fall of the communist government of Enver Hoxha on February 20, 1991. And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, my name is Belén de los Santos. Thank you for watching.